recording.
And now, like, my hair's not all messed up.
Hello, Holly. So good to have you here.
Hi, Nicole. Thank you.
You rock. I'm so happy that you made time. So let me introduce, this is Holly Hamann, and Holly is the CMO and co-founder of TapInfluence. She has started 6 digital startups in media, entertainment, advertising, video, music.
I have helped to start or worked at those startups.
Okay.
I was not the founder of those startups, just to be clear.
I'm with you. I'm with you. She is board member at the Deming Center for Entrepreneurship, and the American Marketing Association has actually given her an award for Marketer of the Year. So she's won that as well. And we're very thankful to have her here because one of the things that she focuses on most with her company is influence. And as we know, the nature of this series of conversations is all about becoming masters at the art of leverage. And there are multiple ways that we can do that. You know, what are we monetizing in our companies, and how are we getting our messaging down? But a big component is all about the relationships we build. So Holly's in the perfect situation because she works with thousands and thousands of top influencers and helps get brands more content marketing from the people that we actually know and trust. So I've got lots of questions for you.
Sure.
Thank you so much for coming. And so first question is, how did you get started with TapInfluence? Were there any key relationships, or what made that show up for you?
Yeah, great question. There were definitely some key relationships. So in the startups that I had been in before, they were about communities or content, video content, print content, performance. And the startup that I was with just prior to this one, we were building a social music network. It was about our target audience were Gen Y, that were engaging with music. It was we were building sort of iTunes and Pandora and Last.fm and Rhapsody all rolled into one. Okay. And the idea was that if you could get a music library that was broad enough, that didn't have all the rights, the right restrictions, and you could get it anytime, anywhere with high quality, would you really care if you owned it? And it was all about music discovery. And on the marketing side, I ran marketing for that company. And part of what we did there is we worked with a lot of music bloggers. And again, our target audience was Gen Y. And what was fascinating is that you can't just take those millennials and pull them into a room and try and have a focus group with them, because they are opinionated and social. But what we discovered is they're only opinionated and social with each other, not when you put them in a little box. And so we thought, how do we get inside the brain of this demographic and learn what makes them tick? What are their purchase habits? How do they interact with music? How do they discover it? How do they buy it? What other technology are they using? So in order to get that out of them, if they need an audience, we actually paid them to blog. Mm-hmm. So I managed music bloggers, these Gen Y millennial music bloggers in cities all across the country, in Nashville, New York, Austin, San Francisco. And these were college kids. We paid them just a little bit of money to blog, and they loved it. And then we couldn't keep them quiet. They wrote about everything. They wrote about their lives, their interaction with technology and music. And then the other key thing that started happening is these aren't professional writers. They just happen to be passionate and very knowledgeable about that particular subject in their area, which meant they were experts. Well, what happened is that we noticed that some major music pubs started picking up some of their posts, and it dawned on us the power of this content. These weren't professional content creators, but again, they were building audiences, they were building followings, and they had influence. So that was one of the most fascinating things that came out of that startup. And around that same time, I met Rustin Banks, who is TapInfluence's current CEO and co-founder. And he was, having his own experience with things going on in his life. He had just moved from Utah to the Boulder area. He and his wife didn't know anyone. They had small kids, so they used social media and blogging content to make connections with other people. And we both were realizing the power of social content in terms of forming communities and influencing people's behavior. So both of our respective networks kept mentioning each other to us, and we ended up meeting in the end of 2008, and then by the first quarter of 2009, we both quit our current companies. He was with Ball Aerospace, and I was with another startup, and we launched TapInfluence in March of 2009. And the whole focus was, even back then, was harnessing the power, the authentic power of working with influencers who are creating relevant content for an audience that trusts them, and finding the ones that are specific to partner with brands where it was an authentic fit, and helping those brands gain trust, build content, and basically keep up with this incredible appetite that consumers have for content. They want lots of it, and they want it all the time.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think makes up influence? Like, what is your definition of influence?
So influence, a lot of people think that influence just means that you have a big following.
Uh-huh.
Well, just because you have a big following doesn't necessarily make somebody influential. What makes someone influential is as annoying as the answer is, it depends. Like, sometimes somebody is influential because of the people that they know, or for the content that they create. For our marketplace, our influencer marketplace, what makes them influential is that they're creating authentic content, and they are experts. They're subject matter experts in a particular area. And what's really cool is that area, or those areas, make up sort of what we consider to be the long tail. Mm-hmm. So, there are the top 1% of people on Vine and Instagram and Pinterest and bloggers that everybody kind of goes after. But there are millions of content creators that are subject matter experts on everything from marathon running to cats, to maybe they're military spouses, or they know how to knit, or they have triplets, or or they're great with makeup, or they're gluten-free, or their content is in Spanish, or they're expats, or they're travelers, and that's what makes them influential.
Give us an example of, because I know mommy bloggers are like, there's so much in terms of massive brands wanting to connect with them, whether it's mommy bloggers or not. Give us an example of, I know you have tons of large brands that you work with, but what's an example of one brand that's done a great campaign, and what was the target audience that they were going after, and what type of influencers did they use? Sure.
So one of our awesome clients is a company called White Wave Foods, and their headquarters is based locally, but they represent brands, and under their umbrella, those brands are Horizon Organics, International Delight, Silk Products, and all three of those brands are clients of TapInfluence. And White Wave is pretty savvy in how they do influencer marketing. So, for instance, let's just take their International Delight product. Well, it's, at first glance, it's a coffee creamer. They make all these flavored coffee creamers. Well, what they realized is that instead of just targeting people who drink coffee or tea, they ended up looking at all of the social platforms and thought, look, the people who were relevant, influential audience for them were people, mostly women, and not necessarily all bloggers. And they are influential on Pinterest, on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook and Twitter. And they were people who were bakers, or they're foodies who would actually create certain recipes. And so what White Wave Foods did is we helped them partner with influencers who would take their products and actually create really cool recipes from them, like special desserts. I mean, even I experimented it with when they had this particular program going on, and I created whipped cream that tasted like Almond Joy, because I made homemade whipped cream, and I used their Almond Joy creamer, and it was incredible. So they're very savvy. They're very strategic and clever. They work with several hundred content creators. They manage that workflow and that content and the distribution and analytics through the TapInfluence platform. And every quarter they get even more sophisticated and more successful, because they take what they've learned and then they tweak it a little bit. And so I would consider them to be a sort of successful leading edge.
That's a great campaign. It's a really cool campaign. So if somebody is brand new and they're starting out and they want to have amazing awareness and amazing pull, and they recognize, because really relationships and who you know is what sells, is what gets you in the door. And so if you're brand new and you're wanting to create your content, you want to actually get out there, what are some of the pieces that, I know you said that we cannot necessarily define the true influencers because there's so many different parameters, but if you were just starting out, what are one or two things you would tell someone to do to just start bumping up their influence?
Sure. So then there's two ways to look at that. There's people who are getting into creating social content for the purpose of being influential and maybe generating income from their content. And then there are a large number of people who just happen to be on social media anyway, and they happen to focus on a particular topic, and they happen to recognize that they were building a fairly significant audience that turned out to be relevant to a brand, and then they decided to leverage and generate income from that influence. So what I'll do is I'll start with the first one. So if somebody is new to this content creation and they're getting into it with the intent of building an audience and intentionally becoming influential so that they can work with brands, do sponsored content, I would say one, have it be a topic that you care very much about, that you know a lot about. You're not telling somebody else's third person story, you're telling your own. Mm-hmm. So if you're a nature lover, it's your experiences. If you're a do-it-yourself crafter and you're always redecorating your home and you love it and you can't help but not talk about that, and that's organically the types of images and content you search for and share, make it be about that. So one is do something that's authentic as opposed to just, well, what does everybody really want to hear or want to see? And then the second thing would be
your voice.
Yes.
Your voice. So you have to have your own identity coming from.
Absolutely. Yeah. Be authentic, having your own identity. And another part of that would be, don't be too broad. I mean, it's it used to be that people just wanted food bloggers. Well, with big data and analytics, you can get very granular. What kind of food are you interested in? What kind of brands in the food space would you want to work with? Are you on the healthy side? Are you organic? Are you a baker? Are you about international foods or a particular cuisine? Are you all about how to keep your kids healthy or eating light or trying to lose weight? There's 100 different ways you can approach just the category of food. And some people err on the side of thinking that the more granular they get, the more limiting they're going to be. But the reality is the more granular and specific you get, the more valuable that content is.
That's so interesting because back when, years ago, when I was involved with NSA, not that NSA, but the National Speakers Association, one of the things that they would say is like niche, niche, niche. And, there was somebody who maybe they did leadership, but they specifically did leadership for parks and recreation. So they were like, their calendar was constantly filled because that's all they did.
Exactly.
So even if you don't have massive traffic, the fact that you're so niche it's valuable because you're hitting those specific people.
Absolutely. And in fact, it might even be more valuable. So for instance, maybe you only have 10,000 followers on your blog or several thousand followers on Twitter or YouTube. But let's just say all of your content happens to be in Spanish and you're a brand trying to reach a Latina market. That's extremely valuable. Or let's just say you create amazing content on YouTube and you create super clever artistic content on Vine. Just the type of content you're creating also makes you valuable.
Excellent. Okay, so I asked you a question, and there were two parts of that. You were going to tell the other part, which I think you might have been going towards what is it the brands want and backing out from there. Was that the second part of that?
Well, it was getting into it. So some people, what we just talked about were people who might be intentionally getting into influencer marketing from an influencer perspective from the very beginning to work with brands and generate revenue. And then there are the other side of those influencers are people who just kind of stumbled across the realization because they were doing what they love, and all of a sudden they discover they have influence, and all of a sudden that's meaningful to Kraft or Procter & Gamble or Seventh Generation or Nike, and all of a sudden there's an opportunity for them.
Got it. Okay, so those are the two sides. Excellent. Okay, so internally at TapInfluence, what have you seen to be the best form of leverage? So was it something that you were monetizing different than other people? I know you have a platform that just came out. How did you get to the thousands and millions of bloggers that you now have access to? Was there a way that you got in front of the one relationship that had 1,000 underneath them? how were you able to, was it messaging? What was it in terms of the lever point that kind of flipped the switch for you and got TapInfluence to be so massive?
I love that question because it's about influencer relationships. So what we did intentionally is if what we're all about is the power of and the drive and the scalability that influencers bring you, one of the things we firmly believe about this whole idea of influence is you have to be adding value to people. You have to be giving, people wouldn't follow you if you weren't giving them something useful. It could be entertaining or educational or motivational, or maybe they just, you're a military spouse and your spouse is on their third tour of duty, and you want to feel connected. So people, it's about that value exchange. And so one of the things that in terms of how we marketed and built up what we consider to be leverage in TapInfluence is really the marketplace of influencers. So since day one, even as the technology has shifted and changed and been refined and we add new features, we have always been champions for influencers since day one. So we go to blogging conferences, we go to social media conferences, we reach out to these influencers. To the extent that it's authentic for them, we get them to talk about us and what it's like to be an influencer with TapInfluence. We do webinars, we create ebooks, and we do content marketing to influencers to help them become more influential. So we have webinars where we teach them the importance of Google Analytics, or we'll get authors from books, like Pinfluence, and teach them how to leverage Pinterest for influence, or what do brands really look for, and how do they choose an influencer for a program. And so that's value. We give that out for free to the influencer community, and then we become the platform and the company that they want to work for.
Which is exactly, you're basically teaching, you're living the model, because what you're doing is you're providing content that has massive value. And I think I heard that you were even doing almost like workshops or events this year and really being able to support people in person. And I know you're working a lot.
Yeah, that was fun. So we did our customer success team and some of our leaders internally. Actually, we did 15 workshops across the country between, San Francisco and LA and New Jersey and New York. And we were all over the map. And these were influencer marketing workshops that both influencers and brands and agencies could attend. And basically what we did is we taught people. We did it local because we wanted everybody to have access to it. And we wanted to teach them how do you do influencer marketing? Everything from, how to use the social platforms, how to find influencers, what makes for great content where it's a win-win-win for everybody, the influencer, the reader, and the brand. Which platforms matter to your brand. If you're in the food or fashion space, for instance, you have to be on a visually driven content platform like Pinterest or Vine or YouTube or Instagram. And then lastly, how do you know any of that's working? How do you set up a program? How do you measure it? How do you know how many people are engaging with it? And how do you measure the influence of an influencer? So we taught people how to do that.
So if people wanted to go look at some of that content, they could probably go to tapinfluence.com and get some of that.
If you go to tapinfluence.com, there's a learning section, and there are ebooks and webinars, and lots of content that's educational.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. Okay. So these were great questions and amazing answers all around the influence component. And I want to take you into a little bit of a different direction, because it's always interesting when I get to speak to leaders in technology and find out about, some of the things that power them. So I wanted to ask, what are your secret weapons? So is there an app? Is there a platform? What is it that you can't live without, that you use every day or every week? What would one of those things be?
So there's two things there. One of them is just personally, what do I not live without? That would be just exercise. I know that's not an app, but
no, that's great. I'm glad you went to something.
I'm a big fan of my jawbone up 24. So I track my sleep, I track my exercise, because we read all the time about, the stories about entrepreneur burnout are just so prevalent. in this industry. And it used to be, startups had a path that took them somewhere in 2 to 3 years, and then it became 3 to 5. And now, the average turnaround of a startup is 5 to 7 years, which means you can't keep up. It's not a sprint pace. It's a marathon. So you have to find your pace. And so I think something I couldn't live without is exercise and taking care of myself, not just from a personal perspective, because it makes me happy, but it burns off stress. And to be honest, I think I'm a big believer that exercise and keeping yourself healthy, it affects your brain. And we're in a really rapidly moving space. It's competitive. And if one of the things that I can do to stay on top of it and be one step ahead of somebody else is by taking care of my brain and my body, then I'll do it.
That is the best answer. I'm so thankful that you went there, which is a great lead into the next question. But I know you had a second piece in there, but that being able to actually focus on the best form of leverage is how are we supporting ourselves internally. So I love that you're absolutely conscious of the things that are going to support you most, and that exercise is one of those elements that keeps you and sustains you. So I'll have you answer. I know you mentioned 2 pieces, and then of course I have to go to the next thing, which is I know why you love to exercise. So,
and then, on the app side, there are 2 apps I love. One is I've recognized that I absorb more information when I listen versus when I read. So I'm a big fan of podcasts and Audible.com. Most of the books that I digest now, I actually do via iTunes or podcast, because I can exercise while I listen to them. There's one of my favorites is a series of podcasts from Stanford University where they have keynote speakers and sessions and leaders come in, heads of Facebook and LinkedIn and VCs and angel investors and people that run accelerators, and they're free. They're both video and audio, and they are free keynote and lectures that are given by these leaders. It's like you feel like you're in the room and you get some inside scoop and get some insight from these people who are super successful.
That's incredible. Definitely have to check that out. And one of the things that I hear successful entrepreneurs talk about, like one of the big things is don't watch TV, because so much more time to do things. And in terms of time to really educate yourself and to be listening to these podcasts, and what better way to get the exercise and the learning piece than to be a marathoner. So I want you to talk about, when you say exercise, I don't know that the rest of the world really understands what you mean by exercise. You are one of our Boulder junkies that just does marathon after marathon. And I was reading your Love and Math blog, and it looks like you just completed another one. So I want to hear a little bit about not just why you choose to be a marathoner, but really what is it that keeps you going? When you're at like mile, I think I can get to maybe mile 2.5 time. I can do yoga, but how is it that you can, sustain your energy and where is your mind during that space? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so they're triathlons as opposed to marathons. And I was a swimmer in college, and I swam competitively. And years ago, I trained and ran my first marathon, and then I got burned out on running, and then I discovered triathlons, and I have been doing them for years. I love them, and I've done all different distances from sprint. I think the longest I've done is a couple of half Ironmans, and I one day hope to do a full Ironman.
I was just going to ask, because we just had one.
I didn't do that one. I was watching enviously. I need a little bit more time in my day to train for something like that, but that's on my bucket list. So also on my bucket list is my life goal is to do 101 before I die. And somebody else has a bucket list that has 100, and I have to beat that. So that's why the number 101. And the Boulder Sunset Tri on Saturday was number 20. So I have a long ways to go, but I think I did 8 or 9 this summer. And being in Boulder is amazing. Like, if you could imagine being in New York City, there's no place to swim. They have to close down roads to run. How are you going to have a whole team of people biking around New York? So, I've done the Alcatraz swim. This summer. Once a year, they close down the East River, and you can swim from Brooklyn to Manhattan. So I did that about a month ago. And
It's crazy.
and the Colorado area, just there's always something going on. And for me, it's one thing that I have that's just for myself. It's not about my child, it's not about work, it's not about relationships, it's not about family, it's not about anything. It's all mine. And so when I'm running or biking or swimming, the only voice in my head is my own, and this rhythm. It's almost like meditative, and everything else just kind of dissipates and goes away. And then there's this silence and the emptiness, and that is just so grounding and nurturing and healing for me. So I love them.
I'm so thankful to have you on today, and just to hear that. I mean, it's wonderful to have you be so conscious of what it is that supports you most, and which is probably a good lead into the last question. So, because the interest is in making this more interactive, I would love to know, what is it that we can do to support you?
We, as in your audience, or
the massive audience I'm about to have as I increase my influence.
Well, from a business perspective, we love being introduced to brands and organizations and companies who are trying to figure out influencer marketing, and help them along that path, and help them become clients. So our sweet spot is the CPG space, so consumer brands in the food, fashion, entertainment, technology. Microsoft is one of our biggest customers. And so if people know brands that could benefit from, who want people online and in social media talking about their brands, we're happy to help them. And then from a personal perspective, I'm always looking for insights from people for how they do it all. Like, how do they stay grounded in a world that's incredibly plugged in, and there's always something to be doing. There's people pulling on our time. We have kids, we work, we have families, we're trying to stay healthy. There's international news. It's like, I'm on a constant quest for kind of how to stay sort of enlightened around all of that, and tips and tricks that people have that work for them.
Absolutely. How do you stay present and in the midst of the chaos and the storm? How can you actually?
Absolutely. Yes.
This has been so wonderful. I'm so thankful to have you on. And if anybody's interested in finding out more, there'll be some underneath here, including an amazing video that you guys just did around content marketing and TapInfluence. You can read about TapInfluence at tapinfluence.com, but you can also take a look at Holly's blog. It's called Love and Math, and she writes for Huffington Post. She writes all over. But I'm going to thank you. We're close to being out of time, and I will see you on the other side. But thank you so much, Holly.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I appreciate the time.
Thank you.